welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'll be reviewing the 2024 French film, The Soul Eater. The film is based on the novel of the same name written by French writer Alexis Obscure, which was published in 2021 and to the best of my knowledge has never gotten an English translation. The screenplay for the film was written by Ludovic Lefebvre and Annelise Betrel, and the film was directed by French directing duo Julien Marie and Alexandre Bastillo. It features Virginie Ledoyen and Paul Hamey in the starring roles. The film had its world premiere on January 27, 2024 at the Jardimer International Fantastic Film Festival in France. It then made its way through a number of different international film festivals across Europe before ultimately being released in theaters in France on April 24, 2024. It also got a theatrical release in Russia on June 27, 2024, before making its way through a number of additional film festivals before being released in October in different European countries and then ultimately in the United States on December 10, 2024 through its 4K Blu-ray release. The film has received a bit of a mixed to positive critical reception, and it has not really done too well at the box office. It also doesn't seem to have been that big of a hit seller on physical media, though we'll see ultimately where it ends up. The film is a mixture of genres, mostly operating within the style of a very dark thriller in the vein of something like True Detective Season 1, while also dabbling in extreme horror, different very graphic horror elements that are in the film as well, which is something that the directing duo is, of course, very well known for. Marie and Bastillo, of course, directed the 2007 French film Inside, which was a part of the new French extremity movement and was a very well-received horror film. It's been their best-received film up to this point in their career. They started off with a bang. It's a film I really, really like, and I've been getting into their work since really getting into the French New Extremity within the last couple of years. I've started to kind of dig into their work now, and this is one movie that they just came out with that I was intrigued by based on the premise and the sort of ideas behind it, the style it was going for. I'm going to be reading the premise off a translation from the Goodreads page for the book because I couldn't find a nice, precise one for the film. So here's what it says. It says, "Some secrets, although well kept, sometimes turn out to be too much to bear when the disappearance of children and bloody murders multiply in a small mountain village with no history. An old legend shrouded in sulfur resurfaces. Ordered by their respective services, Commander Guardiano and Captain de Rollin are forced to join forces to discover the truth." This is the seventh film directed by the duo Julien Marie and Alexandre Bastillo. I, of course, talked about Inside, their directorial debut, which was a huge hit. They then followed that up with two more French horror films, Livid and Among the Living. Then you had their move into Hollywood, their attempted move into Hollywood, with the 2017 film Leatherface, which serves as this weird prequel in the franchise. It was meant to be sort of a continuation in a way of the storyline or the continuation of the Texas Chainsaw 3D storyline. So you're supposed to have Leatherface as the prequel, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original Tobe Hooper classic, and then you would have Texas Chainsaw 3D as a continuation. The film was a direct-to-TV streaming release. It got a limited theatrical release in other countries, I believe, but ultimately it was considered a major failure and flop, and it's a film that I particularly did not care for that much, but I am willing to forgive them for this failure due to the fact that I've heard about all the behind-the-scenes turmoil and the fact that they weren't really able to make the film they wanted to make. From that point on, they've only been making films within France. You had the film Candisha, The Deep House also came out in 2021, and now it brings us to The Soul Eater 2024 release. With this brief context laid out, let's review The Soul Eater. The film tries really hard to maintain its style, which it does admirably well. It has very solid directing. This is a very lean thriller film. It has dark horror elements at moments that almost kind of mix in some humor as well. The horror elements, though, are very strong, right? They're very reminiscent, obviously, of the earlier work of Marie and Bastillo. It is very reminiscent of stuff like Inside. The violence is so well managed and directed and shot, and there's awesome, blood and gore and all that kind of stuff that I love. And these directors are clearly very experienced, right? And they're learning a lot of things through these films that they're directing. And so this one's a very lean thriller film. It's one that they don't really waste a lot of time getting into the story. It's one thing after the next, and you continue to get deeper and deeper into this world, and you continue to maintain interest, I would say. They maintain interest, which is important for a thriller. The ending is a bit maybe more of a controversial point. The ending I thought was well executed. Maybe you don't really like how they went with it, but I thought it was, in a way, it was kind of predictable. Not necessarily exactly what was happening in the film, but I never believed for a second the whole idea of there being some sort of supernatural explanation for everything. And maybe the ending is a bit convenient, and maybe it sort of explains away some things in a way that aren't completely natural. It seems almost artificial in some ways. But overall, I liked the ending. I liked the story in general. I think the writing was, for the most part, pretty well done. You have pretty strong characterization, which is then carried over by the acting, which I thought was well done for the most part. Even the child actors, I think, did an okay job. I think the directing was well done and polished. I think the acting did a good enough job, and there was some strong performances, especially amongst the leads. The writing was solid for the most part. Of course, there's some unexplained elements, and some of the things are a bit plot convenient. But I think in general, it does feel like this really nice dark mystery, and I liked the way that it was written. And I think that the characterization that was given was good enough to kind of get us curious about the characters as well. Now, the twists, you either love them or hate them. And I kind of love them, as silly as they maybe are at times. So in general, I think the story was well crafted. It kind of needed to bail itself out a little bit at the end, but it does a good enough job, and it's admirable in its execution, so I can't hate it too much. I think the editing was well done as well. I think in general, the music as well was good. I mean, most of the technical aspects are well done, are good enough to sort of carry the film. They're not necessarily amazing or anything to write home about, but I do think the cinematography is something that is very strong and praiseworthy within this film. They have a great location for this film, and it's shot beautifully. The cinematography is really something that stands out for this film, and of course, in general, right, this is a huge part of it. It is trying to build this vibe and this vibe of this sort of isolated mountain town, and it does a great job with that. The film in general is trying to emulate something like a True Detective Season 1, which is one of my favorite seasons of a television show ever, and I think it does an okay job. It's obviously not to that peak, but I think in general it's an admirably well done film. So overall, I think this is a strong film. It showcases the maturing talents of Marie and Bastillo, who really kind of cursed themselves when they made such a strong debut. Right now, everything is kind of looked at in an inferior light, but I think this showcases that there still is something within their filmmaking career that's worth monitoring, worth looking forward to, and I think in general, this is a very good film. Not necessarily the best film of the year or anything like that, but it's a strong film that I think is definitely worth a watch if you're a fan of these style of films, which I'm a huge fan of. One thing I do want to mention before the end of this video is the similarities that I find with this film and the 2012 Jessica Biel starring Pascal Laugier directed film The Tall Man. Now, I watched The Tall Man when I was younger, and then I eventually rewatched it once I got more into The French New Extremity. And it's a weird film that I don't think is that good ultimately, and I think The Soul Eater is a much better version of this style of film, but it is an interesting comparison point, and I'm curious if anyone else has seen The Tall Man either. I think that's a film that was trying for more of a stronger social commentary, something that Laugier has tried in some of his other works. But in general, it's interesting to see this evolution from French New Extremity directors from extreme horror films towards more of these mystery thriller films, which is kind of interesting, right? Laugier, of course, hasn't really directed many films since Ghostland. And of course, there's all sorts of stories about his career and why he might not be making films anymore that I'm not going to get into in this video specifically. But in general, it's interesting to see where the French New Extremity directors have gone, right? Alexandre Aja, of course, he's become this like big mainstream Hollywood horror filmmaker. He just made the movie Never Let Go, which I liked a lot, and will definitely be one I talk about in my end-of-year horror recap video. But in general, a lot of them have sort of kind of gone in this weird little limbo space in their careers, right? Like Marie and Bastillo, they're now back in France making horror films, which is a country that when they started making movies wasn't really making horror movies that much. So it's interesting now that they can make these style films within their home country. So for the horror side of the French New Extremity, in a lot of ways, they succeeded. Now there is a stronger horror film industry within France, or at least the possibility to make more of these types of movies, at least for some of the directors. Now for Aja, of course, he moved into the Hollywood landscape. A lot of them tried to kind of move into that landscape, so it'll be interesting to see how their careers develop. We'll see if Marie and Bastillo ever go back or if they stay within France now for the rest of their careers. This is definitely something I'm going to continue to monitor as the years go by, something that I've grown into becoming a fan of myself is these French horror films and these French horror directors. Of course, there's all sorts of new voices now emerging that I'm going to have to check out as well. In general, I think if you're a horror fan, you definitely owe it to yourself to check out what the French are doing because it's very unique and it has a style that leaves its impact, right? Even if the films aren't necessarily the greatest films of all time or anything like that, they have such a strong impact that I definitely recommend you continue to monitor what they're doing. There will definitely be a strong French presence in my end-of-year horror recap video. This is due to the continued influence that country has on the horror landscape. That's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next week.